Thank you guys so much for doing this. I absolutely loved this movie. It's brilliant. It had me cackling and crying in equal measure. So
Excellent.
my wife was in the other room. She was like, "What are you laughing at?" I was like, "There's a Furby and he's raising the dark harvest."
Our proudest moment.
You know, with parents and kids, there's sometimes a disconnect in terms of what they feel like they should be doing, or if they kind of even understand each other. And you know, this has been going on for ages, and it's something that I think is immensely relatable. So I kind of wanted to start off just by asking each of you, you know, when you first knew you wanted to be an artist, and then how your family or you know, friends reacted when you told them.
I sort of decided when I was 14, I was like, I read about that Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine played the guitar 8 hours a day. And I was like, well, I'm going to draw for 12 hours a day. And my parents were like, what are you doing? And my dad was very much like, let's think, great, cool, let's think about real estate, bud. So he was like really trying to pull me into that. But ultimately they just sort of like relented because I was such a lunatic, and they're like, well, he clearly likes this stuff. I don't know. But there was always like tension about it. And so that it is sort of like that part of the movie does come from my real life, because it like, I think it took a long time for me to appreciate that he wasn't just like a villain, that he was like, oh, he's actually has my best interest at heart. He's not just saying that to be a jerk. And then I think it took him a while to sort of understand that, like, oh, I'm not just sort of that I'm my own person, and not just sort of like, I think he liked it a lot when everyone were babies, because it was like very simple, you know. He's like, oh yeah, you know, I tickle them and they laugh, and it's all very simple. And now they're like mad at me for some reason.
And I can dress them like any occupation I choose.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, he's a little fireman today.
I always used to draw and make weird puppets and things since as far as I can remember. And I do remember one Thanksgiving, I made a very elaborate turkey puppet that I brought to the dinner table. And when my grandparents brought the turkey to the table, I went, Uncle Larry. And my grandmother said,
that's a good bit.
Yeah, said, honestly. And I remember my mom said, like, this is just who he is. And I thought to myself, yeah, this is who I am.
My parents are both musicians, and my father ran a dance company for a really long time. And when they saw that I was artistically inclined, I think they were deeply worried. When I told my mom that Chris and I wanted to move to Los Angeles and try to make it in the animation biz, she said, "Oh no, honey." And then
you had cancer or something.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, we tried so hard to keep you from falling into the same traps that we fell into. And I think at some point later, after we moved here, my dad pulled me aside and was like, son, I'm afraid that you're an artist. And there's nothing you can do about it. And that's advice that I tell people sometimes if they're young and they aren't considering a career. I tell them that I'm very sorry, but they don't really have a choice. They're going to be stuck doing this, so they better start getting good at it.
That's perfect. Well, that, you know, that's one of the things that I love about the film, because it's kind of universal in that way, because, you know, I think sometimes parents think they're creating a mini version of themselves, and when their child takes a different path, they feel like they don't even know them anymore. But the film does a great job of really bridging that gap of like, if you work to understand one another, you can find more commonalities than you may assume are there because of the differences.
That is true.
But kind of just to go back, what was the earliest idea that became the Mitchells versus the Machines?
Yeah, it sort of came from me, where I was sort of, I had this opportunity, and Sony was like, "Hey, do you want to pitch something?" And I was like, "Yes. Do you have any ideas?" And I was like, "I've got a zillion ideas," and I had no ideas. So I basically tried to quickly write a bunch. It's sort of indicative of the whole process, where it's like, "Oh God, I have to do all this stuff," and sort of like making promises that I couldn't quite cash yet. But I stumbled upon something that I was really excited about, because I love really personal and unique movies. And it seemed like, oh, I could tell a really personal, sort of subtle, specific family story if I can wrap it up in some sort of genre, package. And as a kid, I loved robots, and I still do. And as an adult, I'm sort of think a lot about how, we live in a world where robots and AI can do some of the same things we can do. So what is the thing that's like worth saving about humanity? What's the thing that's like really important about humanity? And it sort of ends up being sort of our relationships, which dovetailed nicely into this sort of family story I wanted to tell, because I just think the more specific you can be about families, the more it hits people and the more oddly universal it is. So I sort of basically modeled it after my own insane family. And like the dad looks exactly like my dad. And he's like, "You gave me some extra hair. Thank you." But so yeah, that's sort of what the initial nucleus of.
Well, and then Phil and Chris, at one point did you come in? Because I know the film was announced, I think, right before Spider-Verse came out, which I'm sure put even more pressure on this project to be that much greater.
It was pretty early on. Mike had put together, and his team had put together a really funny animatic, really early, and it was all, Mike's voices for all the parts. But you could tell even then that it had like a really distinct voice and vision, and that it was really funny and really emotional. And those are two things are hard to find stories that do both of that. And so they asked us if we wanted to come aboard and help Mike make the movie the best it could be. And we thought it was an amazing opportunity to help a filmmaker whose vision we really believed in. So we just jumped at the chance. And then 2.5 years later, we were still jumping, just a little more tired.
Well, that emotion, I think, is one of the things that sets it apart. And you look at the animation medium, and a lot of animated films that come out are family comedies, and it's a family movie. There's a misunderstanding. They have to work together, and at the end, there's a cathartic, emotional scene. What I really loved about this film is that it's almost as if the emotional scenes are the set pieces. They come kind of almost every 20 minutes or so. They hit really hard. They're shot really beautifully. I think, even just the cinematography of them is like telling the audience, this is not your pee break. This is not your time to walk away. Like, this is something to pay attention to. And you really get wrapped up in the emotion. And I was wondering if you guys could talk about maybe kind of positioning those, if those set pieces were always kind of there. I keep calling them set pieces, but they do feel like that. They feel like these foundational pieces on which the entire film is built. And if they don't work, then the film doesn't work.
No, totally. I think at certain points there were some moments where it was like in this screening, if the audience leaves during this emotional scene, if the audience goes to the bathroom during this emotional scene, we're dead. So, I mean, it really came from, because we always had that emotional spine there, and it was really just sort of plussing those moments and massaging them, in some of the ways you're talking about, with the cinematography and with the, storytelling to like, how can you, and it was often just really slowing down. And Chris and Phil were great at helping with that, because sort of it's like, it's, you can get it like worked into a frazzled, because you're like, oh, the movie has to be 90 minutes, and you get all freaked out, and they're like, no, just let these moments play. Like, this is important. If these aren't playing, the movie doesn't play. So they were always there, and we just, over the course of the years, were just like tightening them and sort of oftentimes like lengthening them to tell the audience that that these these characters' emotions matter and their stories matter, and it's not, and it's sort of like, this isn't a we're not like filling off the check, we're not like checking off the story boxes. We actually care about these characters sort of reuniting and stuff.
Yeah, we want you to be immersed in those moments, and what that requires is enough real estate for the animators to show us what people are thinking before and after they say something. Or maybe there's no dialogue and we're just watching Rick, take in these videos. And if there's not enough time, and if you don't, what I love about that first moment, Rick is looking at videos of Katie, his daughter, as a young girl, and it's really dark. It's like lit really dark. And Mark Mothersbaugh's music is really beautiful there and has a really nice warm melody. And it just has, the movie's taking that stuff seriously. And it's kind of refreshing because it doesn't take everything seriously. So it might surprise you.
Well, it's incredibly silly, but it's silly. Again, if those pieces don't work, the whole film doesn't work. But those pieces really ground the emotions of the characters. And it's not a film that's just immersing you in the protagonist and Katie and like, her dad is awful. And then at the end, you're like, oh no, I like the dad. Like, you really understand both points of view throughout the entire film.
And because we have those kind of foundational signposts, we can give Rick like really skinny legs and a really weird waist and a torso that sort of hangs over it like a muffin, and you still care because we treat him like a human being.
Well, I was wondering if you guys could talk about just how you went about visualizing the story. Again, Spider-Verse, I know, was a lot of banging your heads against a wall until you really broke ground. That film is groundbreaking. I'm sure sets, a really high bar to hit. Not to say this movie looks like Spider-Verse, but it does feel like it's visually being ambitious. It's not just sticking to what an animated film is supposed to look like.
Yeah, it has its own aesthetic that really matches what Mike wanted the thing to look like. And luckily, we had already broken the pipeline at ImageWorks and built a bunch of, I say we built as though we were like coding software. The team of Spider-Verse that was very talented had built a lot of new tools that could be adapted and expanded and changed around to do things that had never been done, and to make this film look as unique in its way as Spider-Verse looked in its own way.
Yeah, like one example is that like in Spider-Verse, they have this really cool effect where with the lighting looks like those comic book dots. They're called like Ben-Day dots or whatever. And then they sort of took that tool and like bent it the other way and sort of used watercolor brushes that like our team provided. So basically it was like you were seeing, even in the lighting, really subtly, you can't really tell when you watch the movie, but there's just like overall, hopefully, it sort of hits you as this thing that's made by a person, so that the like humanity of the family is like reflected on every frame, ideally.
There's crew members that are, cross-pollinating between the two pictures. So, Mike Lasker, VFX soup on Mitchell's, worked on Spider-Verse, and now he's taking all of the smart things that they figured out on Mitchell's and applying it to Spider-Verse too.
Mike Lasker was really funny. It was almost like Spider-Verse like broke him, because like when we met with him the first time, he was so like beaked up. He was like, "Yeah, what do you got?" And then we were used to like everyone sort of being like, "Why do you want to make it look different?" He's like, "How can we make it look more different?" I was like, "Whoa!" But it was so fun because he was excited and we were excited. So as soon as we started throwing him stuff, he's like, "Let's do 14 versions." And I was like, "I would love it if you did 14 versions." So he was really great.
Was there any sequence in particular that was like, oh, this might break us, or like this one we're having a really hard time getting this one right in terms of the visualization of it?
For me, at least, the hardest thing was just finding that first initial look of picture. Because like, I feel like once we found the look of picture, wouldn't say it was easy, but like all of the scenes more or less fell in place, and the big stumbling block was like, what exactly does the movie look like? And it took all these iterations, and there are versions of the movie that look straight up insane, just like, you know, like it looks like a horrible video game or something, and we just sort of had to keep pushing it and stuff to make it look different. And I would do this test where I would take like 3 recent animated movies, and like I had them on little pieces of paper, and I would hold them next to the screen, and I was like, it doesn't quite look different enough yet.
Really? I didn't know that.
and it was cool, and it was like awesome with Chris and Phil, because, you know, we can say that and say, oh, we want it to look more different, and we want it to reflect humanity in every frame, you know, and the studio's like, you get out of here, kid. But it was cool to have Chris and Phil to be able to be like, no, do what this lunatic is saying, and sort of, and also pushed us to go further too, because we were like, at one point, like, we pushed this pretty far, and then they're like, can you make it look more like the stuff you guys love, which was like the best note we ever got.
See, the one thing I remember specifically that was really hard to get right in this was the hair on the characters.
Yeah.
Like, that was one of the things, like, even when we had sort of like landed on the look and the watercolor feel and the environments and how it integrated with the characters and the color lines on everybody and the hand-drawn details, it was that, how do you do hair that's simulated like regular hair so it flops around the way hair, especially a messy-haired character like Katie, and have it feel as stylized as everything else. And when you're painting with watercolor, you're not painting every hair, you're painting these broad swaths with a couple of little detail lines in it. But then if you do that, just that, it ends up looking like the hair is big plastic or metal or something, or like stiff. And so you had to, like, how does it have the movement of hair and the feeling of hair, but is as stylized as the rest of the movie? And that, I mean, that was sort of like the last thing that we kind of like, okay, this looks good.
That was one where we like they were like, this is the most expensive, like our Rick's hair. They're like, this is the most expensive head of hair in Sony ImageWorks history. We hope you're happy. We made some numbers. I was like, we are happy. Thank you.
Anyone.
If you told us it was the second most expensive, we'd say, well, what can we do to make it the most?
We make it the most expensive. Yeah.
How significantly, you said it was 2.5 years, how significantly did the story itself change during that time? Or did it kind of lock into place pretty early?
The pillars of the story are exactly the same, and the characters are exactly the same, and the specifics of the story have changed a lot.
There was always a giant Furby, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true. There's always a giant Furby. There's always
We're like, we can't change this.
Well,
The whole movie
actually,
was
briefly,
hard.
we had to take it out because they were like, the producers were like, they're never gonna go for this. So we had to tickle me Melmo, who is the eye patched Elmo, like from Mad Max.
That's right.
But anyway.
But you know, a lot of the specifics and some of the like minor character drives and a lot of the specifics of the scenes are very different from how they started. But like the spirit of the story is the same.
It went from a movie about people fighting to a movie about people getting along. And so the middle of the movie has a lot of sort of subtle little accomplishments. And we would say, like, this family needs to put points on the board because we've established the problem. We established what's not right. And now we want to watch them try to make it right, even if they fall short. Because I think you got a little tired in older versions where they just, you know, you spend a lot of time arguing with your family in real life. It's nice to go to the movies and sort of model what it looks like when you don't fight with them.
Yeah.
And it was really tricky to get it so that the family was having positive accomplishments and everyone was trying, but that it wasn't fully 100% clicking, in which case the movie would be over in that and so having them still have something to strive for was a tricky balance, but Mike and Jeff and the whole team are really amazing at figuring a way to navigate through that.
Well, I was also really pleasantly surprised by the film's approach to technology, and specifically the villain. I mean, you don't necessarily plan on empathizing with a cell phone, I guess getting Olivia Coleman helps a little bit, but again, that speech, and I've been seeing this more and more recently. But you think about villains like Killmonger or Magneto, where it's like I don't agree with their methods, but I can understand where they're coming from. But also just with the technology, with this film isn't like everyone stop looking at your phones all the time. That's what's wrong with the world. Again, it's through Katie's point of view and Katie's eyes. This is how she communicates. And I was just kind of wondering how you guys approach that technological aspect and the villain itself, who falls in a cup of water at the end.
That was a really tricky balance because like those villains, if your villain doesn't have a compelling reason to do the things they're doing, the movie doesn't work, or the movie feels like you feel like a dummy whenever the villain's on, because at certain points in the movie the audience was like, wrap it up, whenever Pow would come on, and I think that it really took sort of having Pal making really good points, and giving the positive case for technology, which 100% exists. Sort of like cell phones help us, they connect us. They're not the problem. People who use the cell phones, incorrectly are the problem. The technology is just a tool, and humanity are the people who are not using it well. So that was sort of her point. And also another thing that we learned is just unless your story is about a relationship, I feel like the audience really loses steam. And when we made the sort of realization to make it a relationship between Mark and Pal, that Mark threw away Pal and Pal was resentful and saw that as an example of all the bad things that humans do, that's finally when those scenes made sense, because you could kind of tie it to the family, leaving people behind and that sort of thing. So it was this balance of trying to give the positive case for technology as well as the dangers.
And it does help having Oscar winner Olivia Coleman do the lines.
Yes.
I will say. It doesn't.
Got a lot better when she.
Yeah.
Supernatural treasure.
She's so good, and she's also so funny. I mean, I always she's in Hot Fuzz, just playing a really silly character in Hot Fuzz. So it's always nice to see her stretch those comedic chops again.
Well, she can do both so well. It's like if her scary reads are like spine chilling, and her funny reads are like the funniest lines you've ever heard.
So, speaking of technology, where did the Furby come from? How did the Furby evolve? Because I'd seen like the snippet in the trailer, but just watching that entire sequence within the context of the film, I was laughing my head off the entire time.
I'm very glad, because in our first screening, we had that scene, and I would say 50% of the audience was really into it, and then there were a couple moms that were like, "We are leaving." But it was basically like, we were trying to come up with something that was like, we're always trying to like come up with specifics. And one of my friends had showed me a picture of what happens when you take the face off of a Furby, and it was the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And we tried to do that in the movie, and it was too horrifying. So we had to pull back from that. But then there was all this drama about like, will we be able to get it? And we were finally able to sort of like, hey, this could be good for Furby. It's good for us. It's great for everybody.
You think Uncut Gems helped us?
I think so. Sure. Why not?
I think it did.
Brought it into the lexicon. It sort of revitalized Furbies.
I remember when it came out, we're like, uh-oh, they got there first. But I think it's all right.
There's room for both.
Yeah.
It just put it back in the meme culture zeitgeist there, which fits right in line with the film, I think.
Yeah.
Which is something I really like, though, because, it's easy to decry, memes and kids on TikTok and stuff. But again, the film is saying this is how Katie communicates. It's bridging a gap of understanding between her and her father. And I love that that's visualized in the film with various memes. Was it hard to kind of find that balance of like, are we doing too much? Are there too many like meme pop-ups throughout here?
Yeah. At one point, I showed it to my nephew who was 14, and he's like, the glass is lowering. the old Vine thing, that sucks, man. That's not cool anymore. And I was like feverishly writing, like, okay, it's like my unpaid 14-year-old, focus test. Like, okay, what memes do you like? But ultimately, it was like we had to just go with things that were more universal. I think we got into trouble when it was like a really specific meme from like right now, because it would immediately be dated when you'd see it. But it's like a screaming monkey kind of.
Right.
Everybody likes the screaming
I think it'll
monkey.
be a thing that if it's only funny if you know the memes, then it's not good enough.
Yes.
It has to be something that if you don't know what this is, then it works for the story and what the character's doing, then we're golden.
Yeah.
But I think that like it was important to, we were saying that Katie's a filmmaker and she's using these tools to make her movies and share them with a community of like-minded people, and there's no way you want to say that that's a bad thing and we should stop doing that. It's a tool for creativity and communication, and it's exciting that you can do that. And at the end, it's important that you see the family is literally communicating over like a Zoom-like program with each other. They're using technology in a healthy and positive way. So it certainly, we didn't want to make it like cell phones are evil. It's like the most banal and trite thing you can say.
Yeah, that's what I really appreciated about the film, is it didn't really take any of the obvious routes that you might expect a film like this to take. I wanted to talk about the ending, which not only, how do you dispose of the villain, throw in a glass of water, but that moment you just described with the Zoom call, I was wondering how early you guys hit upon the right note, for the end of the film, and how that kind of evolved over time.
That's the little sequence came and went, right? It kept shaking out of the movie, and we were worried about length. And I just remember when we put that in, the scores shot up like crazy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I think people, wanted to make sure that the family, that whatever bond that they had wasn't over. Like they want to make sure that all of these wins that they got in the movie aren't just like, well, now Katie's off to college, all progress is lost, and I think that like it was feeling like without something like that, which could feel like maybe too much or something, but with it, we found that without that, and without like seeing the family go on a road trip together at the very end, that it felt like that it was just a little bit unsatisfying, because the audience wanted to see Katie regarded as a hero by her peers, and they wanted to see the family having made these strides, and we found that when we took it out, people were like, what happened? they were all upset.
That's fair. Was it difficult to find how to dispose of the villain, to dispose of the antagonist?
I don't think that was honestly very early, and we had to update it, because in between the time we started the movie and in between the time we ended the movie, cell phones became waterproof. So we started getting this note like, cell phones are waterproof. F you, this movie sucks. So we're like, all right, we'll put a crack in it. Is that okay? Are you guys good with that? And that seemed to work.
That's funny.
I feel like there was a chapter where she was hunting for a bag of rice and couldn't find it.
Yeah, that was gonna be the end tag, is like dun 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 dun, and then like a spotlight comes down on a cup of rice, and then like you see a robot hand dun 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 dun, dun drop it in.
Did you guys end up putting that together, or was that just
we never actually? I think we boarded it, but it was just at a certain point, it was like the ending was already like 25 minutes long or something.
Well, and it's in that ending as well that it's there were some hints throughout the film, but it's confirmed that Katie is part of the LGBTQ community, and I wonder if you guys could talk about that, because I really love that it's not a plot point, it's not a point of contention, it's just a thing that exists as happens in everyday life.
We just like wanted to sort of like reflect in the whole movie just like real people and real families that we love, and we also have a lot of crew members that are LGBTQ plus. And like when this came up, we had sort of like ran it by them, and they were like, "Go do it more!" They were so excited that it got us excited. We're like, "Oh, this seems great." But then at the same time, the story isn't about, you know, coming out or sexuality or anything like that. It's just about how to deal with your family. And in talking with them, it sort of seemed like, oh, that is the better way to go, where it's like, you know, just like her eyes are brown, you know, she happens to like girls. And, you know, if it's normal in real life, why shouldn't it be normal in animation?
Yeah, and it's no big whoop.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we did versions of the movie where it like really tried to steer into that more, and it just didn't feel right, felt inorganic.
Yeah.
And the thing that's lovely about it is, you know, no, you know, it's not an issue for their family. Their issue is about like, you know, the differences in generations, and essentially like, you know, Rick saying like, why do kids leave the house? I don't like this.
And then also not understanding her art, and it's not about anything about, you know, her
because
sexuality.
you know, and you don't really want to model that, right?
Right.
You don't really want to tell a story for, especially that, you know, a lot of the children are going to watch, where you even give people the idea that it might not be okay,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or that someone in your family might not go for this. That was really on our minds too.
I thought that was really well done, and really appreciate that point as well. Also really blown away by the voice cast in the film, all around. I was wondering if you guys could talk about putting that together.
I made a mistake, you know, me and Jeff, when we were writing the movie, Jeff Rowe, my co-writer and co-director, who's a genius, because we sort of weren't writing it towards voices. We were just sort of like writing like, oh, this is kind of like my dad or something. And we sort of realized that when we did get people like Danny McBride and Abbi Jacobson and Maya Rudolph, it was like so electrifying to have these people bring all of their creativity into it. And it also made the characters easier to write. You were like, oh, I know kind of the fun areas that Abbi Jacobson plays with, or whatever the character is. And so, and it also like, and in engaging them, you know, they'll say something really funny in a voice record, and we'll be like, oh, we should like write towards that, because it was such a good bit. And they're all like, you know, Abbi and Danny are like writers and directors and stuff. So it's like, they also know how to sort of shape scenes and stuff. Like, so they like know the moves, and to, you know, they don't like go insane with improv, but they sort of keep it sort of like towards the point of the scene. So it was like wonderful to bring all them in, because they really brought the movie up exponentially when we got their voices in.
I really appreciated Beck Bennett and Fred Armisen as
they're great.
malfunctioning
They're the best.
robots.
You can tell they like each other.
Yeah.
I wrote in my notes in all caps here, Mark Mothersbaugh. I think his score is incredible in this film. I've loved his work in Hollow Your Films, Phil and Chris, and just really thought this one, I think this is one of his best scores. I was wondering if you guys could talk about working with him on here.
It really is beautiful, and it does all the things that Mark does really well, which is sweet melodies, really unusual sounds, and then weird computer beepy boopy stuff that you've never heard before, bringing that sort of like weird like synthy-tron element onto a very like analog, earthy, homemade score, and it sort of takes all of his superpowers, and then I think he just did a really beautiful job.
Mark is known for his, you know, quirky palette and arrangements, but the surprising thing is that his melodies are so memorable, and we've listened to a lot of composers, and I don't know if anyone writes melodies as beautiful as Mark's, or as memorable. And then you go, oh right, he's like a Grammy-winning songwriter. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for writing memorable songs.
Yeah.
Sorry, my dog is barking at people outside.
No problem.
It happens.
Yeah, it's a tremendous score. You know, I also wanted to ask, I mean, obviously this film was supposed to come out last year. It was supposed to hit theaters. It's now going to Netflix. What was that experience for you guys of finding out that the film would be switching to Netflix and changing titles? Do you have a preference on the title?
They said like, hey, they're moving to Netflix, and they want the original title back, and I was like, why am I wearing a Netflix shirt right now? This is the best day of my life. So that was cool, and I think it was sort of like a signal too that Netflix was like really game to sort of engage with the things that we really loved about the movie. You know, that it is original and sort of like leaning into that, which was really cool. And also just in general, it's really nice to be able to say to anyone like, hey, you could see this movie on Friday, go see it. And they're not worried about, you know, they're not worried about anything, and they're like able to watch it safely and as soon as possible. Because you know, one thing we talked about is like, even though like hopefully this is hitting people great right now, but you know, that who knows how it would play in 4 months, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months. So we're glad to get it out as soon as possible because it's about technology.
Right, super resonant for this moment. Hopefully it's universal for all time, but it's especially relevant coming out of an apocalyptic type event where you know, technology was something that was both you know, a savior and a crutch and a villain.
I'm happy that, you know, people the world over can see it. I'm still holding out a little bit of hope that Netflix will somehow put it in theaters, because I'd love to see this on a big screen at some point, because I just think it's beautiful.
It's really it's the artist did a lot of great work, and I do sort of hope that at certain points someone could watch it on a big screen, because it was made for that, and it's they just put a lot of love into each frame.
But I like to sit very close to the television.
I think that's very good for your eyes.
Yep. And pro tip, if you just kind of stick your thumb out there and imagine that that's like another person in the theater 5 rows ahead.
Yeah.
Kind of works.
Just put a podcast on low so you can mimic people talking during the movie.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm trying to watch the film.
I believe the cough is still in the film. I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
Is there a cough in this one? Okay.
There is.
That is one of my favorite gags in all of cinema. In Jump
What's
Street.
funny is that, like, especially for a film that's really mostly going to be playing in people's homes, it's extra weird.
Yeah, there's someone in your house. That's not someone in your house. That's Chris Miller's cough from 22 Jump Street.
That's right.
I love that. You know, I do also feel like the film is built to last, so I appreciate the fact that I can just throw it on, you know, anytime now, and it does feel like a film that's going to be made. It's going to be like a feel-good movie for people, because and it's got a lot of rewatchability to it. And I will say, as someone who loved the movie and loved the characters, are there any plans for a sequel? I'm okay if there's not, but do you guys have ideas for any follow-ups?
I'll say Sony is really excited for a sequel. We're all pretty tired right now.
Yeah.
If
You're not
do
working on
pause the
anything
movie-
else, so it's fine.
If you pause the movie at a certain point, you could read all of Katie's pitches for the sequel, which are
Okay.
totally bizarre and insane. So look out for those. And also, if there's a fan campaign to make one of them, maybe they'll make that one. I don't know.
I like that. Like maybe the fans can make a bracket.
Yeah.
And then whichever one.
Yeah, that's what we'll make.
Yeah.
I am interested in that. I want to thank you guys so much for taking time to talk to me about this wonderful movie, and I want to thank you guys for making it. I really appreciate it, and I love this movie, and I hope everybody watches it.
Hey, yes.
Oh,
Me
man.
too.
Thank you. This is my favorite interview of all time.